Hello. It is with some trepidation that I approach this subject, but it needs to be done. Race politics has the power to tear this country apart, and it is also very personal. The middle way that I am trying to walk is a minefield laid with traps from both the left and right of politics. I'm sure to offend some, but that is not my intention. Rather than that, my aim is to include as many as possible and through dialogue create a common vision of how we can build a better Australia. Australia is divided, the issue is race politics, and the problem begins with how we think. On both sides of politics and through our universities, liberal individualism dominates our minds, and it's been going on for 500 years. But René Descartes was wrong. We are not just individual, we are also community. We are not just separate, we are also connected. With individualistic ethics, governance, economics, liberalism has built a society of increasingly isolated individuals. Our neighbourhoods and suburbs are becoming social and economic vacuums where people neither know nor interact with one another. Isolated and often lonely people try to scratch out increasingly marginal lives while the rich get richer and the planet suffers. Something is very wrong. We know it, but we can't put our finger on the problem. We can't think straight, and that is because we are brainwashed by 500 years of individualism. We reach for answers, but we're stuck in the old paradigm. On the left, individualistic ideas about rights and identity have fueled a cliquey, woke, moral elitism that routinely defines anyone outside the clique as racist, misogynist, homophobe, etc. Faced with these attacks, the right is like a cornered and dangerous animal. Its hackles up and ready to fight. But the right also lacks good ideas. Their would-be more conservative, look after our own ethic is deeply compromised when it is paired with neoliberal, sell out your neighbours economics. So it has been left versus right, us versus them conflict, with both sides beholden to an essentially incorrect liberal individualism. Where the fighting is most fierce, where, if we are not careful, we could see our country torn apart, is in the field of race politics. To figure out the problem, first we need to figure out how to think. Thankfully, with this, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. What we need has been described many times before. Abraham called it the great tongue of balance, Aristotle the golden mean, Muhammad said straight path, Buddha middle way, and Confucius Tao. These are all the same thing, with lion and eagle in his left hand and right, double-edged sword from his mouth. This way of balance is also the way of Jesus. An ideal ethic is found in a balance between extremes. We are individual and community, competitive and cooperative. We need both freedom and social cohesion together. With balance, both sides are positive and they help one another. On their own, either extreme is negative. In this context, talking specifically about race politics, we need to look at the nature of rights. Rights are both individual and collective, and we need to be understanding them together. In the liberal tradition, we have heard a lot about inalienable individual rights, but there is a problem with that. Where we are connected as a community, as a common culture, as a nation, we owe something to one another. And that mutual obligation gives us collective rights that those outside our community do not share. We have individual rights, but we also have rights as family members, neighbours, Aboriginal, Muslim, Anglo-Saxon, Christian, Chinese, etc. These collective rights have been undervalued by the liberal tradition, and in that way it has undermined cultural identity and social cohesion. So we get to race politics. Modern Australia was founded with the vast and violent dispossession of Aboriginal people. While much remains hidden, a recent study found more than 400 massacre sites across Australia. Following the previous legal doctrine of terra nullius, or empty land, The prior possession of Australia by Aboriginal people was not recognised in law until 1992. This is a people who continue to be marginalised and systemically disadvantaged. They are impoverished, undereducated, they have high levels of substance abuse, high crime rates and low life expectancy. I am a supporter of extensive reform in favour of advancing Aboriginal people. This includes with respect to their natural rights as the long-term possessors of this land. This great work of building a post-colonial nation, necessarily conducted over decades, includes enabling a pan-Australian Aboriginal nation with sovereign government and which acts as a parent nation to the broader Australia. This plan is not just in the interest of Aboriginal people, however, it is also in the interest of new Australians. Because of this unfinished business, there is something missing with how we belong in the land. Something missing that cuts away at our pride as we live our lives in this place. I hope to convince all of you of the wisdom of this approach, but we will have no chance of getting there if we cannot break down the us versus them race political fighting. To break down the polarisation, we need to build up the middle ground. The key to this is respectful dialogue. That sounds simple. Currently, however, the middle ground where dialogue takes place is beset with traps laid by both the left and right. To enable dialogue, a cliquey left needs to back away from labelling as racist anything that is not top shelf politically correct. The right, for its part, needs to be more gentle and more considered. Building up the middle ground takes the wind from the sails on either extreme, takes the heat from race politics and allows us to work together. For this to happen, it is essential that we feel able to publicly discuss many concepts that are currently excluded or deeply controversial. This cuts both ways. For example, on the one hand, we need to go through the truth-telling of the massacres, the ethnic cleansing, the systematic genocidal intent that has flowed through the white colonist society. We need to genuinely engage with ideas about what is fair and appropriate for the symbols and institutions of a reconstructed post-colonial nation. On the other hand, we also need to encourage people to share hard, well-intentioned opinion from the other end of the political spectrum. For example, a person might say that a high rate of Aboriginal deaths in custody is mostly the result of high rates of Aboriginal crime and high rates of Aboriginal imprisonment. Another might note that many people who identify as Aboriginal are in large part ethnically and culturally Anglo-Saxon. To allow us to engage together in our common interest of building a post-colonial nation, left and right need to take a breath, hold off with the us versus them, and let the middle ground grow through complex, well-intentioned dialogue. That is the path to becoming a great nation. That is the path to dignity and pride. Since colonisation, Australia has been a mostly white Anglo-Saxon society. In recent decades, however, we have seen the rapid advance of multiculturalism. Now, almost a quarter of Australians speak a language other than English at home, including Mandarin, Arabic, Vietnamese, and Punjabi. Between 2001 and 2021, the number of Chinese-born Australians increased fourfold, with those of Chinese ancestry now representing 5.5% of the population. Over the same time period, Indian immigration to Australia increased sevenfold, now 3.2% of the population. Over those 20 years, the number of Australians who call themselves Muslim has doubled through immigration to 3.2% of the population. These rapid changes to our society have been conducted through the broken, utterly incorrect ideology of liberal individualism. The liberal theory of multiculturalism is that we are all the same, a society of individuals, but we are not. We are also cultures, races, communities. There is a way forward for us to build a harmonious, multicultural Australia, but it is not through individualism. Our identity and rights have dual roots, both individual and collective, and we need to support both sides. On the one hand, through enabling people to maintain cohesive communities where people tend to share a common culture, language, ethnicity. This includes for the still dominant white society, for the Aboriginal, and also for newer and diverse immigrants, including the Chinese, Indian, Arabic, Javanese, and many others. On the other hand, along with cohesive communities, we need to maintain an open, friendly, cosmopolitan public space where we create over time a common Australian identity through cross-cultural interactions and relationship building. These two aspects of a multicultural society need to work together. Without that, race political tension and other symptoms of social breakdown result. Such is indeed the current situation. Living already marginal, isolated and often frightened lives with socially vacuous neighbourhoods, the still dominant white Anglo-Saxon culture has been asked to accept rapid and deeply ill-theorised multicultural change, while anyone without blanket support for that change has been labelled as racist by a cliquey progressive left. Moderate, well-intentioned dialogue has been shut down, but resentment has been growing. Something is starting to snap. An angry right wing is becoming increasingly vocal and powerful. Once again, to break down the us versus them race political fighting, we need to build up the middle ground through encouraging dialogue that includes any well-intentioned opinion. Again, in shifting the window of what is acceptable, we need to let it cut both ways. To start with, we need to radically slow down further changes to Australia's ethnic makeup. With such poorly planned change in recent decades, and with rising racial tension, we need time to settle with change that has already happened. We need time to build a multicultural society that works. This is not just on the national scale. We could also reasonably talk about people determining for themselves a rate of ethno-cultural change for their local communities. After 500 years of individualism, building strong communities needs to be a central focus for us. Communities where people can easily communicate with a common language and cultural values. These cohesive communities are for the white society as well as for the many and diverse people of Australia. Far from dividing us as a nation, these strong local communities can help bring us together. Having space to be ourselves makes us strong, so that we feel safe to come together, crossing cultural boundaries in an open, interactive public space as we build a common Australian identity. This vision of a middle way is of an Australia made with rich local communities, all bound within a cohesive, common national dream. The middle way theory here is that this vision represents a stable yet dynamic, healthy balance. It will emerge organically through dialogue, some push this way, some that, until we find common ground. If we fail to enable that dialogue, however, we can expect to see an increasingly troubled and divided Australia, with dysfunctional communities, a lonely and forbidding public space, and beset by racial tension. If left and right can take a breath, hold off on the us versus them, race political point scoring. If left and right can take a breath, hold off on the us versus them race political point scoring, if we can all try to keep our opinions respectful and reasonable, then the middle ground will grow. It is through a strong middle ground that we enable people to live fulfilling lives, both individually and as Australians, as members of diverse cultures. We enable people to live fulfilling lives, both individually as Australians and as members of diverse cultures.